Welcome to Talk Gnosis. Tonight, we are being joined by Bishop Stephan Hoeller of the Ecclesia Gnostica, one of the most senior bishops of the whole entire Gnostic movement, well respected by many, not only in his community, but throughout all of the Gnostic churches. One of the probably greatest authors of Gnosticism in all of the Gnostic churches. I think that there probably is not many churches who do not use at least a few of Stephan's works in part of their formations program. So welcome to our show, Bishop Hoeller. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Well,
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be with you.
You know, some quick questions for those who aren't familiar with you is that how did you come to Gnosticism to begin with, Bishop Hoeller?
Well, how do any of us? I had a number of dreams and visionary experiences that were, as I subsequently found out, of a Gnostic nature already as a child. And then I developed a very keen interest in the subject and looked for literature everywhere where it was present. And so by the time I was in my teens or so, I considered myself a Gnostic.
Very good. I would imagine at that time there wasn't as much translated. I know that we had works such as Epista Sophia and others, but I think for one to probably self-identify as a Gnostic at that period was probably a little bit different than it is today with the amount of information that is all over the internet and all in print.
Yes, certainly the literature was much more limited. A great deal of it was in the translations of the late J.R.S. Mead, including Pistis Sophia. It was, about 3 or 4 codices that were discovered and then were translated sort of right around the turn of the century. And that's pretty much all we had until Nag Hammadi.
There was a pretty big shift at that point.
Yes, it was a big shift, but of course there was exegetical literature, commentaries and things of that sort about too, some of which very, very comprehensible and very useful, such as Hans Jonas's The Gnostic Religion, which came out sometime after World War II. And from all of those sources, one could really gain quite a decent picture of what the old Gnostics were all about.
And then in the late 70s, Elaine Pagels came out with her books, which kind of popularized Gnosticism, or at least knowledge of Gnosticism in the U.S. Did you see a lot of changes around that point?
Yes, well, of course, Elaine's first book that was sort of really a blockbuster was the book The Gnostic Gospels, and that came in very soon after the publication of the translated Nag Hammadi library. So those things kind of work together, and that is true. But of course, we also must remember that there was a sort of semi-underground Gnostic tradition alive all the time in various places, particularly in France, where since the very early 1800s there was a functioning Gnostic church with various branches. So that we did not need to rely entirely on literary sources about our information and our inspiration.
And you had those liturgies that had already been developed, so that really made up made up a great deal of your tradition and your church's tradition. Were your liturgies?
Were there liturgies about? Yes, I mean there were there was liturgical material in French that had been translated, and for the most part, I think some of us early people in the field in this century, we availed ourselves of existing liturgies of the liberal Catholic Church and American Catholic Church and so forth, and modified them to be more purely Gnostic in their thrust.
Now, how did you get involved with the actual Gnostic Church, Bishop Hoeller? Because originally you were not ordained in a Gnostic Church, correct?
I was not ordained in the Gnostic Church as a priest. I was subsequently consecrated in the Gnostic Church itself. Yes.
And how did that come about, as far as your involvement with the Gnostic Church?
Well, it's a long story, but let me make it as short as possible. When I was about 16 years old, I spent a year in Belgium. And while in Belgium, I met a couple of gentlemen who, both of them, of course, deceased by now, who were members. I think one of them certainly was a priest of the French Gnostic Church. And they advised me about a great many things, including literature and other things. And when I then came to the United States, and arriving here in 1952, there was no Gnostic organization, especially of an ecclesiastical nature, functioning here at all. And so my Belgian friends advised me that I should contact particularly one ecclesiastic and one church here in California, which is about as close to being a Gnostic like we are, and they should begin my training and my orders there. And that was Bishop Lowell Paul Wadley, who was the head of the American Catholic Church, as it was called, the independent Catholic Church, with a very beautiful little church building in Laguna Beach, California. And so I worked with him for a number of years, and then in 1958, he ordained me a priest. And I remained, I served at the church, I remained with him there, and then in the early 60s, he suddenly passed away. And right around that time, then I met a Gnostic bishop who was undisguised Gnostic, who came from England, Bishop Richard Duke de Palatine, and I started working with him. And then about, let's see, how much later, about 1967, he consecrated me a bishop. So that was my contact with the Gnostic succession as such.
Interesting. Now, I would say that would probably make the Ecclesia Gnostica probably one of the longest established Gnostic churches in at least in North America.
I would think so. I have never heard of another one functioning really prior to the time that we began functioning.
I know that Bishop Herard had come from Haiti and had brought...
Roger Victor Herard was, of course, Haitian.
But that was at a later time.
Yeah, and he, of course, his succession and his activities were tied in with the French Gnostic Church, which in turn was very closely interwoven with the Martinist order. And so that was his succession, but that was quite a bit after us.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned, his church being tied in much with the Martinist orders, the Martinist succession. In many of the Gnostic traditions, you do see, especially those who come from the French traditions, very close ties with those of very initiatic traditions. In fact, the Gnostic Church of the French has many times been called the Church of the Initiates, because they have been tied to things like Memphis Mizraim, the Martinist Order, the Ela Cohen, etc. Has there been a period of history where the Ecclesia Gnostica has promoted such fraternal organizations, or has your church always remained independent?
We really have never promoted or have been intertwined, as some others have been, with any of the initiatic organizations. Our members, including our clergy, are of course free to join anything that they wish. Many of them are Freemasons of one jurisdiction or the other, and some of them are Martinists, but in terms of our functioning, the church is the church, and there is no combination with any other organization, although individuals are of course free to engage in such if they wish.
Very good, and I think that many of us would agree that's probably the way that most churches should run, is that it should be up to their members if they do decide to work with any particular organization.
Yes, that's true, but we have to remember that a lot of this originated in the political and social milieu of France, where it was a lot easier to proclaim that you were a Martinist than that you were of the Gnostic Church.
Absolutely.
True.
There was not, and there still really isn't, the kind of religious freedom in most European countries, and therefore the French Gnostic Church, for instance, sort of functioned for a long time in very close alliance with the Martinists, and services were held in the Martinist temples and so forth. And most high-grade Martinists were Gnostic bishops. But there were very evident practical reasons for that.
Understandable. One thing I did want to ask about Bishop Hoeller is you are a noted Jungian scholar, and I was wondering, how do you feel that it's important for modern Gnostics to have an understanding of Jung?
Well, I would say that, at least in my experience, that Jung was actually a modern Gnostic prophet.
Okay.
And I think he is of the stature of a Valentinus or a Basilides or a Prophet Mani or people of that sort. And he obviously acquired his Gnosis, as most of us have, individually by way of his own spiritual experiences, and then he looked for sources of people who have had similar experiences to his own, and that is how he discovered the Gnostics. And I think his message, especially when taken away from the strictly psychological field, is very, very Gnostic. So I think modern Gnostics living in our time can receive a great deal of help and great deal of inspiration, and a sort of able to update, perhaps to some extent, their Gnosticism with the aid of C.G. Jung's teachings.
There's the depth of insight in that tradition. I've recently been exploring Jung a bit, and it's fascinating. I'm looking forward to doing more, and I know that you've written some works as well, so I'm looking forward to reading those as well.
Well, I hope so. Mine was sort of a pioneering effort. Let me say, my Gnostic Jung and the Seven Sermons to the Dead, which was published in the late 60s, was a pioneering effort in that direction. And now, of course, there are others, and with the recent publication of Jung's really esoteric material in the so-called Red Book,
yes,
we have a great deal more of material along those lines. than we had before.
Mhm. We've talked a lot about mental health on this show with previous guests, and would you recommend that modern Gnostics consider pursuing a Jungian analysis as part of their path?
Well, I would say that if they are interested in psychology,
Mm-hmm.
or if they feel that they are in need of some therapeutic procedure, then certainly practitioners of the Jungian school would be much more uh, appropriate for their purposes than any
Mm-hmm.
other. It doesn't actually have to be full analysis, which is a very long process.
Sure.
But if some therapy is needed or things of that sort, I think the best people to turn to for a Gnostic are undoubtedly the Jungians.
Very good. We are drawing close to the end of the show, but I do have one more quick question for you before we start to wrap up things, Bishop Hoeller, is that, many of us are seeing what we almost would label as a new age of popularity of Gnosticism, both in various forms of media, in movie, we see various Gnostic themes. Are you yourself seeing sort of a rise in the popularity of Gnosticism, and is there anything that you kind of attribute this to?
Oh, absolutely. And we can agree on the data that there is a sort of minor Gnostic renaissance taking place. There have been others before, such as toward the very end of the 19th century, but I think the present one, in its scope, really outdoes all the previous ones. And what the precise reasons for this are would take quite a bit of analysis, but it is probably that the existing religious structures, especially in Western culture, have proven to be rather inadequate in the 20th and in the 21st century, and so they have declined. And the nature of the Gnostic tradition, on the other hand, is such that there are many, many elements in it that are, once again, let's say, are useful and timely for the present time, even though they were formulated almost 2,000 years ago. And the Gnostic spirit is much closer to the modern and postmodern trends in our culture than I think the overwhelming majority of the churches and religions that we find abroad in the United States and in Europe and in Australia and in New Zealand and in Canada and everywhere. Also in the Spanish-speaking countries.
Well, on that note, I think I'm going to ask an audience response question. Is do you think that we're seeing an increase of popularity, a new age, if you will, of popularity of Gnosticism? If so, why or why not? We love to hear your response to that, either on our Facebook page or on our notes or comments here on our YouTube channel. If you've enjoyed our show, and if you found it helpful, you can support this show and our ministry by going to Patreon, that is patreon.com/Gnostic. You can pledge a small amount per video or per podcast, which directly supports the show and the development of other Gnostic programs. Bishop Hoeller, for those who are looking for you, where can you be found on the internet, or where can they find you physically for those in the Los Angeles area?
All right, very quickly. We have a very extensive and long-standing web page, www.gnosis.org. And it has much material in it, including copies of practically all the Gnostic scriptures. We have the entire Nag Hammadi corpus on our webpage.
Mm-hmm.
It can be downloaded, and many others.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as my own work is concerned, if anybody comes to Los Angeles, we have services every Sunday morning. In addition to that, twice a month also in the evening. We have lectures every Friday night, and we are located at 3363 Glendale Boulevard in Los Angeles in Atwater. And my telephone number, which is also the telephone number of the church, but it rings at my house as well, is 323-467-2685.
Well, thank you for sharing. I know that I have a few friends in the Los Angeles area who attend your church on a regular basis and have always enjoyed your ministry. I think for myself, and probably speaking for Bishop Peterson as well, we appreciate you being on the show and for all of that you've done for the Gnostic movement over the last 40 years.
Well, I'm very appreciative of your appreciation, and I wish all Gnostics, and whether they are committed Gnostics or whether they are sympathizers, I wish them all the best, and I'm always very happy to meet them when they show up.
Very good.
Very good.
Once again, we want to thank Bishop Hoeller for being on the show, and all of you for watching. We really do appreciate your viewership. As always, we appreciate the feedback. And you can find us online on Facebook. You can send us feedback in comments. Or you can continue at talkgnosis@gnostic.com. Thank you so much for joining us.
This has been a production of the Gnostic NYC Network. For more information about this and all of the Gnostic NYC Network's programming, visit GnosticNYC.com. The opinions expressed in this show do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Gnostic NYC or any other organization. This show has been released under a Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike 4.0 International License.